The sky was dark, crackling with electricity as lightning split the heavens, sending a surge of light over the town. The wind howled, gusts rattling the windows of the Matthews home. As the storm raged outside, 5-year-old Emily Matthews pressed her small face against her bedroom window, her eyes searching through the heavy sheets of rain. Her heart beat faster as the desperate cries of a dog pierced the night. "He's still out there, Mom," Emily whispered to her mother, her fingers tracing the cold glass as if the raindrops could carry her voice to the helpless animal she could feel but couldn't see. Victoria Matthews, standing in the kitchen, glanced up from her work, noting the distress in her daughter's eyes. She'd seen that look before, the same look Emily had worn the first time she'd found a bird with a broken wing, or a squirrel hit by a car. Emily's compassion ran deep, sometimes deeper than any adult could understand. But tonight there was something different in her tone, a raw, pleading desperation that made Victoria's heart ache. "He's scared, just like me," Emily continued, her voice trembling. "Please, we have to help him. Welcome to HeartForce channel, where you and I find more meaning in life through stories about dogs." Before we continue, please comment below and let us know where you are listening to this video from. And if you have any stories about your dog, feel free to share them with everyone. Victoria walked over and placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder, looking out the window at the storm that seemed to worsen by the minute. Her eyes fell on the silhouette of a large dog, a German shepherd, chained to a rusted post just outside the market at the end of the block. The poor animal was soaked, trembling, its fur matted with rain and dirt. The vendor's stall had closed hours ago, and the market was empty, yet there the dog remained, abandoned to the elements. This wasn't the first time Victoria had seen the dog. It had been weeks since Emily first noticed him, chained and left in the cold, ignored by the market vendors who passed him by without a second glance. But tonight, with the storm reaching its peak, something in Emily's heart told her that this wasn't just any night. This was the night someone had to act. "Mom, please," Emily repeated, the intensity in her voice breaking through Victoria's resolve. "He's drowning. We have to do something." Victoria hesitative. She thought of the vendor, Marcus Peterson, and the coldness with which he dismissed their previous inquiries. "That dog's worthless," he'd said, pushing them away as he added, "Better off dead." His words echoed in Victoria's mind like a slap, reminding her of the cruelty that often went unnoticed. But tonight was different. Emily was right. The storm raged on, and the dog's cries grew more desperate. Victoria knew she couldn't ignore it any longer. "John," she called out to her husband, her voice rising above the storm. "Get the car ready. We're going to the market." Minutes later, the Matthews family SUV crawled through the flooded streets, the headlights barely cutting through the downpour. As they approached the market, the scene before them was nothing short of horrifying. The rising water had nearly reached the dog's neck, the chain wrapped tightly around the post, leaving him with just enough room to keep his head above the water. His eyes, wide with fear, met Emily's across the darkness. Emily's heart shattered as she screamed, her voice high and full of panic. "He's drowning. We have to help him now." Without another thought, John Matthews jumped out of the car, bolt cutters in hand, charging into the knee-deep water. His heart pounded in his chest as the dog's eyes locked with Emily's. It was as if the two were connected by an unspoken promise, a promise that they would never leave each other again. Minutes later, the chain was severed. The dog, trembling but free, staggered toward Emily, his golden eyes filled with gratitude and a spark of hope that hadn't been there moments before. It was as if the storm had broken something inside him, a silence that had lasted far too long. And as Emily reached out, her small hand brushing against the dog's wet fur, the bond was forged. "It's okay now," Emily whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm, but filled with certainty. "You're safe." As the Matthews family led the dog back to their car, the rain began to slow, as if nature itself was acknowledging the change that had just occurred. The storm was passing, but for Emily, the true storm, the one that had been brewing in her heart for as long as she could remember, had only just begun. The next few days were a whirlwind for the Matthews family. Their home, which had always been a sanctuary, was now a place of intense emotion and unexpected changes. The dog, whom Emily had named Thor, had not only survived the storm, but was now living with them. His body was battered, his fur matted, but his eyes told a different story. There was something noble in them, a quiet strength that seemed to whisper, "I've been through worse, and I'm still here." Thor spent his first night in the Matthews home huddled in a corner of the garage, which they had converted into a quiet space for him to rest. Emily stayed close, reading aloud to him, her soft voice a constant reassurance. Thor, who had been through unimaginable trauma, responded to her words with a calmness that seemed almost miraculous. Despite the horrors he had faced, he trusted her. He trusted her with his pain. "You're going to be okay," Emily whispered as she read from a storybook, her voice steady. "You've made it through the storm. Now we're going to help you heal." The following days brought both challenges and progress. Thor's body was frail from months of neglect, and every step seemed to take immense effort. But Emily was there always. She fed him, bathed him, and sat beside him as he rested. She became his advocate, his protector, the one person who understood the depth of his suffering. Her parents, John and Victoria, watched in awe as Emily took charge of Thor's care, despite her young age. They had always known she had an extraordinary connection with animals, but they had never seen her so determined. Emily was no longer just a little girl with a soft heart. She had become a warrior for the voiceless. "Mom, Dad," Emily said one afternoon as they sat together, Thor resting beside her, "we can't let him go back. He's not just any dog. He's special." John and Victoria exchanged uncertain glances. They had already called the local authorities, but Peterson, the vendor who had left Thor to die, had been a master of manipulation. The legal system was often slow, and without concrete evidence, it seemed like there was little they could do. But Emily was unwavering. She insisted that they not give up, that they couldn't let Thor return to the life of abuse he had endured for so long. Emily's determination sparked something in her mother. Victoria had always been the calm one, the voice of reason. But now, as she looked at Emily, so full of passion and courage, she found herself questioning the boundaries they had once accepted. They had the power to help. "I know, sweetheart," Victoria said, her voice trembling slightly. "We'll find a way." But the fight to keep Thor was not going to be easy. News spread through their small town, and with it, the controversy. People had begun to take sides. Some supported the Matthews, rallying behind Emily's brave act of compassion. Others, however, followed Peterson's twisted narrative that Thor was dangerous, too unpredictable to be kept in a home with children. At Millbrook Elementary, where Emily went to school, the whispers started. Behind her back, some of the other children referred to her as Dog Girl, laughing at her expense. Her once peaceful recesses now felt like an arena where the cruel words and taunts stung with an intensity she had never known. She had always felt different, but now it was as if her empathy for animals had made her an outsider. At home, Thor was struggling too. Despite his gentle nature, the trauma of his past left its mark on him. His nights were filled with nightmares, his body trembling with the memories of the chain, the hunger, the neglect. And every thunderstorm sent him into a panic, as if the heavens themselves were a reminder of all he had suffered. But Emily never left his side. Every night, she would sit with him, whispering calming words, brushing his fur, trying to soothe the ghost of his past. Her own nightmares, too, had become more vivid. She dreamed of men with riding crops, of chains, of Peterson. Each night, the fear crept into her bones, just as it had crept into Thor. Yet through it all, something miraculous began to happen. As Emily continued to care for Thor, she learned to see the world through his eyes. She saw beyond the dog's scars, his physical frailty, his trauma. She saw the hero inside him, strong, noble, and willing to protect her at any cost. But it wasn't just Thor who was healing. Emily, too, was changing. She began to find her voice, not just in caring for Thor, but in standing up for what was right. One afternoon, at school, Emily was faced with the class bully, Billy Thompson, who taunted her about Thor. "Your dog's a killer, Emily," Billy sneered, his words cutting deep. "He's dangerous, just like you." But Emily didn't cry. Instead, she stood tall, her eyes fierce with a new strength. She had learned from Thor that courage doesn't mean never being scared. It means standing up when you're afraid and doing what's right, no matter the cost. "Thor's not a killer," Emily said, her voice clear. "He's a survivor, and he's teaching me how to be brave." Her words hung in the air, a declaration of defiance, a promise to herself and to Thor that she would never back down. And in that moment, something shifted. Emily was no longer the shy, quiet girl who had kept her distance from others. She had become the voice of the voiceless, the one who stood up for those who could not speak for themselves. At home, her parents saw the transformation in her. They had always known Emily had a special connection with animals, but now they saw how that bond was shaping her into someone stronger, braver, and more determined than they could have ever imagined. The fight for Thor was only just beginning, but Emily was ready. She knew that, together with Thor, they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. Because in that moment, she understood something profound. Sometimes the greatest heroes aren't the ones with capes. Sometimes they're the ones who choose love over fear, compassion over cruelty. The days following their decision to fight for Thor were filled with frustration, paperwork, and constant tension. The Matthews family knew the odds were stacked against them. Peterson was not only a local vendor with connections in high places, but his reputation for manipulating the system made him a formidable opponent. In the weeks since their rescue of Thor, the community had divided sharply. Supporters of the Matthews family rallied behind their cause, but others, influenced by Peterson's influence and manipulation, began to question the family's motives. Whispers filled the air. Why would they want to keep such a dangerous animal? Why fight so hard for a dog? For Emily, the schoolyard taunts grew louder, and each day became a reminder of how her decision to help Thor had cast her in the role of an outcast. At recess, her classmates, once friends, avoided her. Their whispers echoed in her ears, the sting of their judgment cutting deeper than she could have imagined. But Emily, though only 5 years old, had learned more about courage in the last few weeks than many adults ever would. She knew what she had to do: fight for what was right, no matter the cost. And with Thor by her side, she felt invincible. The fight for Thor's future had moved from a personal struggle to a legal battle. John Matthews, a respected pediatrician, and Victoria Matthews, a counselor at Millbrook High School, began consulting with animal welfare groups, animal control, and even lawyers, trying to find a way to prove Thor's abuse and reclaim his life from the clutches of Peterson. But as each day passed, the task seemed more daunting. Peterson was crafty, and his connections in the community made him difficult to challenge. Victoria had already tried to report him to local authorities, but they had dismissed her concerns, citing a lack of evidence and Peterson's ability to smooth-talk his way out of trouble. "Without clear proof, all we have is our word against his," John said, his voice tired after yet another frustrating call with a lawyer. "It's going to be a long fight." Meanwhile, Thor's health continued to improve under Emily's care, but the trauma he had endured ran deep. His physical wounds were healing, but the scars on his heart would take longer to fade. He was still haunted by the sound of chains, by the smell of rain and damp wood. Thunderstorms triggered panic attacks, and he would often retreat to a corner, trembling as if reliving the horrors of his past. Emily did her best to comfort him, sitting by his side, her small hand resting on his fur as she whispered soothing words. "It's okay, Thor," she would say softly. "I'm right here. We're in this together." But even as the Matthews family fought for justice, they were met with opposition at every turn. Neighbors who once greeted them with friendly smiles now crossed the street to avoid them. Businesses owned by people with ties to Peterson subtly distanced themselves. Emily's teacher, Miss Anderson, began to notice the shifts in the classroom. The whispers behind her back were getting louder, the isolation sharper. One day, as Emily sat at her desk drawing pictures of Thor, his golden eyes and proud posture clearly visible in every stroke. A classmate named Billy Thompson approached her with a cruel smirk. "Your dog's a killer," Billy sneered. "Just wait. He'll turn on you too, just like all the other dangerous dogs." For a moment, Emily's heart skipped a beat. She had heard the rumors before, but hearing them from Billy, someone who had once been her friend, felt like a blow. Her eyes welled up with tears, but she refused to let them fall. She could feel Thor's presence in her heart, urging her to be strong. "No, Billy," Emily replied, her voice steady. "Thor's not a killer. He's a survivor, and he's teaching me how to be brave." The word surprised even Emily. In that moment, she wasn't just standing up for Thor. She was standing up for herself, for the strength she had found in him, and for the courage she had discovered in the face of adversity. Billy looked taken aback, his smirk faltering. He opened his mouth to say something, but no words came out. Instead, he turned and walked away, leaving Emily to hold her ground. At home, the challenges only intensified. The legal process was slow, and every time they thought they were making progress, something or someone blocked their path. Despite the growing pile of evidence from Mrs. Robinson, the flower seller who had witnessed Peterson's cruelty and the support from local animal welfare groups, it seemed like Peterson always managed to stay one step ahead. Emily's parents spent countless hours on the phone with their lawyer, trying to figure out the next step in the fight for Thor. They consulted with veterinarians, animal behaviorists, and law enforcement, trying to piece together a case that would finally expose Peterson's abuse. One evening, as Emily sat at the kitchen table with her parents, her face tense with worry, a knock on the door interrupted their conversation. Mrs. Robinson, the flower seller, stood on the doorstep, holding a small notebook in her trembling hands. "I've been keeping records," she said, her voice quiet but determined. "Dates, incidents, and witnesses. I was too scared to speak out before, but I can't stay silent anymore." Victoria invited her in, and soon, the kitchen table was covered with evidence, notes, photographs, and a detailed history of Thor's abuse. For the first time, the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together. The abuse Peterson had inflicted on Thor was not just cruelty. It was part of a larger pattern. "I'm not alone in this," Mrs. Robinson said, her voice breaking. "Others have seen what he's done, and I'm not afraid anymore." As the Matthews family prepared to take their fight to the next level, they began to realize that this wasn't just about saving one dog. It was about challenging a system that allowed abuse to continue unchecked. It was about finding the courage to speak out, to expose the darkness, and to shine a light on the truth. For Emily, this was just the beginning. She had learned that justice was not something that happened on its own. It required people willing to risk everything for what was right. And with Thor by her side, Emily knew she was ready to fight for him, no matter what it took. As the Matthews family faced more challenges in their fight to save Thor, their resolve only grew stronger. The legal battle had escalated, and the pressure from the community was mounting. Yet, the bond between Emily and Thor was unshakable. What had started as a simple rescue had now become something far greater, a fight for justice, for truth, and for the healing of both a dog and a community. The days seemed to blur together as they prepared for the next phase of their legal struggle. Emily, now fully committed to her cause, spent hours researching animal welfare laws and the rights of abused animals. She would often sit in the living room, surrounded by books on animal care and rescue, her young mind soaking in every detail. It wasn't just about helping Thor anymore. Emily had discovered a new passion, one that would shape her future. But as Emily poured herself into helping Thor, the community's judgment began to intensify. Emily's classmates continued to whisper behind her back, their ridicule cutting deeper with each passing day. They didn't understand. They didn't see what she saw, the noble, patient dog who only wanted love. To them, Thor was a threat, a dangerous animal. At school, the cruel taunts became unbearable. Billy Thompson, who had once been one of Emily's closest friends, was relentless. He would make cruel comments about Thor, trying to get others to laugh at Emily. "Maybe you should let him off his leash, Emily," See what happens, Billy would say, laughing as the other kids joined in. Emily tried to ignore it, but the words stuck with her. She knew Thor wasn't dangerous. She knew he was just a victim, a beautiful, loving creature who had been through hell and back. But the more Billy and the other kids taunted her, the more her resolve grew. Emily would not let them break her. She would fight for Thor, and she would show them the truth. One afternoon, as Emily was sitting under a tree at recess, drawing pictures of Thor, a classmate named Sarah came over. Emily looked up, surprised. Sarah had always been friendly, but lately she had been avoiding her too. "Emily," Sarah said softly, sitting down beside her, "I'm sorry about what's been happening at school. I know Billy and the others can be mean, but I think you're doing the right thing." Emily's heart swelled with gratitude. She had never expected anyone to stand up for her, but here was Sarah offering her support. "Thanks, Sarah," Emily replied, her voice steady. "Thor's not what they say he is. He's a hero. I know it." From that moment on, things began to change. Sarah started standing up for Emily, even when the other kids ridiculed her. Slowly, other students began to take notice. They began to see that Emily wasn't just a little girl trying to rescue a dog. She was someone with the strength to stand up for what was right. But outside the schoolyard, the battle was far from over. Peterson was still a looming threat. His attempts to undermine the Matthews family continued, and his network of supporters in the community was vast. But with the evidence that misses, Robinson had provided and the support of the few who believed in Thor's innocence, the Matthews family began to see a glimmer of hope. One afternoon, as they sat around the kitchen table with their lawyer, a new development came to light. Sarah Bennett, the local veterinarian who had been helping with Thor's medical care, had some shocking news. "I've been in contact with some people in law enforcement," Sarah said, her voice tense. "There's something bigger going on here. Peterson's not just a dog seller. He's connected to a network of illegal dog fighting rings. He's been stealing service dogs, including Thor, and selling them to these rings." The room fell silent as the weight of her words sank in. This wasn't just about one abused dog anymore. This was about an organized crime operation that had been trafficking in animals, exploiting their training for profit and violence. And Thor wasn't the only victim. "We need to expose him," John said, his voice firm. "This has to end. Not just for Thor, but for all the dogs he's hurt." But the investigation would not be easy. Peterson's network of corruption ran deep, and he had friends in high places, connections in law enforcement, the local government, even courts. This battle was going to be long and hard. But the Matthews family had something Peterson didn't: the truth. As the weeks passed, Emily continued to help Thor recover. His physical wounds were healing, but his emotional scars ran deep. Thor's anxiety was still a constant battle. He would start shaking at the sound of thunder or when anyone raised their voice. But Emily never gave up on him. She sat with him during the storms, holding him close, whispering words of comfort. "We're not going anywhere, Thor," she would say. "You're safe. We're in this together." And with each passing day, Thor began to trust again. He would follow Emily around the house, his eyes softening as he realized he was no longer in danger. He would curl up beside her as she read her books, resting his head on her lap, seeking the comfort he had long been denied. One evening, as Emily sat by the window, watching the sunset, she turned to Thor, her hand gently resting on his fur. "You're going to be okay," she whispered, her voice filled with certainty. "You're home now." And for the first time in a long while, Thor's eyes seemed to sparkle with hope. The darkness that had clouded his spirit for so long was slowly beginning to lift. As the Matthews family prepared for the next phase of the legal battle, they knew that they weren't just fighting for one dog. They were fighting for justice, for a community, and for the truth. Emily had already shown more courage than anyone could have imagined. She had stood up for Thor when no one else would. Now, it was time to fight for the future of all animals who had been hurt, abandoned, or exploited. The fight ahead would be difficult, but Emily and Thor were ready. Together, they had already faced a storm that had threatened to break them. Now, they were standing stronger than ever, ready to face whatever came next. The final stages of the battle for Thor had begun. The Matthews family, along with the support of their community and a few brave allies, had rallied together for one last push. What had started as a simple act of kindness, a young girl rescuing an abused dog, had transformed into a legal and moral crusade. Emily and Thor had ignited a fire in the hearts of those who saw the truth. Together, they had shown that love and compassion could change the world. For Emily, the road ahead was both thrilling and terrifying. Every day, she faced the weight of what had become her fight, not just for Thor's safety, but for all animals who had been exploited or abused. The legal battles were heating up, and Peterson's attempts to intimidate the Matthews family only grew more desperate. But Emily had never been more sure of her purpose. One morning, as the courtroom loomed just ahead, Emily sat in the living room with Thor, her hand resting on his head. His once ragged coat had begun to regain its luster, and his posture had returned to something resembling his old dignity. His eyes, once clouded with fear and pain, now shone with a quiet strength. "You're a hero, Thor," Emily whispered, her voice full of pride and love. "You've been brave for so long. Now it's our turn to be brave for you." The courtroom was filled with tension as the day of the trial arrived. The Matthews family, along with their legal team, were ready to face Peterson, who had brought an army of legal tactics to try and reclaim Thor. But what he hadn't counted on was the power of truth. The truth about the abuse he had inflicted on Thor, about the network of illegal dog fighting rings he was connected to, and about the unwavering resolve of a little girl and her dog. Emily sat at the front of the courtroom, her eyes focused on the witness stand. Thor was by her side, his calm presence serving as a reminder of the journey they had shared. The audience, which included neighbors who had once turned away, now watched with bated breath. The air was thick with anticipation, but Emily was not afraid. She knew what had to be done. Mrs. Robinson, the flower seller who had witnessed Peterson's cruelty, took the stand. She held up the notebook she had kept for months, documenting everything she had seen. Her testimony was powerful, her voice steady as she described the abuse she had witnessed. The other witnesses, local vendors, neighbors, and even former animal control officers, came forward, each providing vital pieces of the puzzle that would prove Peterson's guilt. But it wasn't just the evidence that would sway the court. It was Emily, the young girl who had loved Thor with everything she had. The girl who had refused to back down when the world tried to tell her to stay silent. When it was her turn to speak, Emily stood tall, her small figure somehow commanding the attention of the entire courtroom. "I didn't save Thor because he was just a dog," Emily said, her voice clear and unwavering. "I saved him because he deserved to live. He deserves love, just like any living being. And he showed me that sometimes the greatest heroes aren't the ones in uniforms. They're the ones who love, who protect, who stand up for what's right, even when it's hard." Her words were like a beacon of truth, lighting the way for the jury and everyone in that courtroom to see what they had all been blind to. Thor wasn't just a dog. He was a symbol of resilience, of survival, and of the power of unconditional love. By the end of the trial, Peterson's attempts to discredit the Matthews family had fallen apart. His web of lies, his network of corruption, and his cruel treatment of Thor were laid bare. The jury deliberated for only a short while before delivering their verdict. Marcus Peterson was found guilty of multiple charges: animal cruelty, theft, and involvement in illegal dog fighting rings. The evidence had been overwhelming, and the truth had prevailed. He was sentenced to a long prison term, and the network he had been a part of was dismantled piece by piece. For Emily, it wasn't just about the victory in the courtroom. It was about the justice that Thor had deserved for so long. It was about the community coming together to support what was right. It was about showing the world that even the smallest act of compassion could spark change. Back at home, the Matthews family celebrated. The weight that had hung over them for so long had finally lifted, and with it, the future seemed brighter than ever. Thor was free, finally free to live a life filled with love, comfort, and care. Emily sat beside Thor, her hand resting gently on his back. She had always known that Thor was special, But now she understood something deeper. She had seen firsthand the power of love to heal, to restore, and to transform. And in that moment, she knew that no matter what challenges life would bring, she and Thor would face them together. The bond between them had been forged in the darkest storm, and now it shone brighter than the sun. "Thank you, Thor," Emily whispered, her voice full of gratitude. "You taught me more than I could ever teach you." We did it. As the sun set on that quiet evening, Emily and Thor sat side by side, watching the world outside. Together, they had faced the storm, and together, they had emerged stronger. Emily's journey with Thor teaches us that love is not just about the happy moments. It's about the courage to fight for what's right, even when it seems impossible. It's about standing up against cruelty, finding strength in each other, and making the world a better place. One act of kindness at a time. Thor's story isn't just about survival. It's about the healing power of unconditional love and the extraordinary bond between a dog and a child. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this story. Have you ever been part of a rescue mission? Or has a dog changed your life? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to the HeartForce channel for more powerful, uplifting stories. Let's continue spreading hope and making a difference together.